everybody. Welcome to the Random Redshirt podcast. I am one of the hosts, Zach, and the other host is Chris. What's up, bro?
Hello, Zach. Great to see you. Great to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. So excellent. Excellent to be here. How was in the US, your Thanksgiving holiday? Everything good? Peaceful?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it was pretty nice. We had some friends over and so we ate, watched a little bit of football, played some board games, hung out, it was good. It was a good time. We also did a gingerbread house competition.
Ooh.
So yeah, our friends that came over, I guess, have this kind of tradition they do where on Thanksgiving they make gingerbread houses. And so we turned into a competition. So it was like
Mhm.
me and my wife versus the husband and wife of the friends that came over, and then their two kids matched up with our two kids, and we had like a competition, and then we had called in somebody else to be an objective third party, like on the phone, and they saw pictures and everything and judged, and my wife and I's gingerbread house did not get first.
Oh,
Fact,
but you
actually, one
guys
of the
tried.
kids' houses got first. Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah. The kids got first. That's good. That's awesome. That's a
But
great idea,
but
the
it was a
gingerbread.
blind vote though. So it was like, yeah, it was
Yeah.
like there was four gingerbread houses, right? So there was A, B, C, or D. So no, the judge had no idea whose house was belonged to whose. It just
Yeah.
so happened that the judge happened to like that one, and then I threw up the Florida card and demanded a recount. But besides that, no, it was good. How
Right,
about yours?
man.
How was yours?
It was good. Yeah, we hosted. So, we did that, had like a whole lot of food, a whole lot of leftovers. So there was a busy holiday weekend for us. I made some of the Dungeons and Dragons pie, the rose apple and blackberry pie that was in
How did it
the
come
Dungeons and
out?
Dragons. Yeah, that came out fantastic. I was like, wow, it was so good. I mean, for real, that has to be like one of the best pies I've made. And
Really?
yeah, I made
The
sweet potato pies too, but I made this. I mean this rose apple and blackberry pie was outstanding.
Oh yeah, I love my grandmother makes a really amazing like wild blackberry pie, like you
Yeah,
fresh pick the blackberries and everything, and so that sounds really good. We'll have to tell Kyle about that. Speaking of
yeah,
Kyle, if
yeah.
this is your first time watching or listening to us, we very much appreciate it. Welcome to the Random Redshirt podcast. We're a couple of nerdy guys who like to talk about all things nerdy, Star Trek, Star Wars, everything in between, and at the time of this recording, our episode with fanboys Ritter Kyle Newman just came out. But if you're watching us at a later point in time, about a week later or so, it's been out for a while. If you haven't watched it, be sure to go check out our discussion with him. It was fantastic. We had such a wonderful time with him. It was so great. Really great guy, and it was awesome getting to know him.
It was. He was amazing. He was thoughtful. It was just terrific to hear his thoughts on Fanboy, but also on Star Trek in general and Star Wars in general,
Yeah.
on Dungeons and Dragons, and just his love of, the different mediums and art forms. And it was very cool to see that he had the same interests that we did. So it's
Yeah,
nice.
he's a nerd just like the rest of us, right? So, and it's cool because if you don't know, for those of you watching or listening, he was one of the authors of the D&D cookbook, which is one of the recipes that Chris is referencing for the
Mhm.
pie he made. So, I mean, I'm not a huge D&D player, but it sounds like there's a lot of good recipes in that cookbook.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of recipes. The pie was one. I've made everything soup. I want to make miner's pie, which is another one.
Is that like a
So it's
shepherd's pie kind of thing, or like a meat
yeah,
pie or something?
yeah,
Yeah,
it is a meat pie. It is a meat
gotcha.
pie by the
Yeah,
dwarves. It's a meat pie for dwarves if you're into D&D.
there you go.
I have been
There you,
studying D&D,
have
so
you
I have
really?
been doing that lately. Yeah, I've been studying that. I'm trying to prep because if all goes well, then I can do a game master like with my daughter, and that'd be great. That'd be a lot of fun to do. So I've been
Yeah.
studying that.
We
It's
will.
good.
So, when we had Kyle on, you remember he said how interesting and cool that was that we were going to do Blade Runner RPG at some point. Maybe we'll have to
Yeah.
invite him and see if he's free. He wants to join us. That'd be fun.
Yeah. I'm so much looking forward to Blade Runner 2 and kind of setting that mood and that atmosphere. It's gonna be
Yeah.
awesome, man. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it as well.
Yeah.
But
Cool.
today we are here to start a new spotlight series, and that is a spotlight. Yes, the little we haven't even have our Star Trek mugs here that we're holding up for those of you
Oh,
listening.
we both have Star Trek mugs. That's
Yes, mine has
fantastic. Yeah.
the yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Mine is tea Earl Grey hot.
Now, are you drinking Earl Grey tea? That's the
Or
question.
yes, I am.
Oh,
Yes,
see,
I
that's
am.
even better. Okay, so good.
Yeah.
I'm drinking peppermint hot chocolate because I'm not really a tea drinker. I'm not a coffee drinker, so that's what
There you
I'm
go.
drinking because it's kind of
Yeah.
chilly out. But we're starting a new spotlight series, and Chris, this was your idea. We talked about, and
Yeah.
if you haven't watched our episode where we do kind of just a generic overview of the Star Trek finales, right, of each series finales of TOS through Enterprise, and then we rank them from best to worst. I know you would come up with this idea, Chris, about saying, "Hey, why don't we watch the pilots and talk
Mhm.
about each of the pilots in depth?" And we will go back and do the finales in depth at some point too. But I think this whole thing came about with the idea that we wanted to do TNG deep dives. We have not touched TNG other than our series overview, and we knew, and I've said as well that we are long overdue to jump in and do some episodic deep dives of Next Generation. And you're like, well, why don't we start out with Encounter at Farpoint to kind of set us off? And I think that was a great idea. So here we
Yeah,
are.
absolutely. Yeah, we are. And the fundamentals starting at the beginning, the premiere of the TNG show encounters at Farpoint. And then it'll be, that idea kind of happened organically for us, and it'll be beautiful to go back and take a look at the Legacy Trek and the different premieres and the pilots of theirs and compare them and share our favorites. But this was nice, and you're right. We had not deep dived into TNG. And this was just the perfect opportunity to explore the fundamentals, particularly like we had discussed um, not too long ago, all good things. So this
Yeah.
was great to come back to the beginning and how did it all begin. And you know what I was when I was thinking about that and reading a little bit about this first episode of TNG, it was I have to say I'm gonna do some comparisons to Star Wars too. So they brought for this premiere, they were able to bring back Gene Roddenberry, right? So that was it became his baby again and his
Yep.
creation. And in the because in up through the Star Trek movies with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy up to then, Gene Roddenberry had been more of the executive producer, kind of advising and not been as involved. So TNG got him really, really involved. He wrote as this episode along with DC Fontana, so he
Hmm.
brought DC Fontana back in. So that was like amazing and that was great. And one of the things that I thought was like super, super, super smart, and I don't remember quite what Star Trek Phase 2 was about, but what I felt that was super smart about TNG was that they set it like in the future, 80 years in the future from the original series to give it like a separation so there wouldn't have inevitably there's always gonna be some comparison
Yeah.
with TOS, but they set it far enough in the future so it's its own thing. And when I was thinking about that and comparing it to Star Wars, I was like, oh, you and I have talked a lot about like, well, why, set set whatever new Star Wars movie, Star Wars series, like somewhere like far in the future or way in the past, so
Yep.
you're not like still chained to the Skywalker saga or trying to like unravel like all of that. So that's what I know they've tried to do some of that with Star Wars Acolyte, which I haven't I haven't watched at all, so but I haven't heard great things about it. But
Yeah.
still, I thought that was so smart for TNG like to do that because it established it like as its own thing, which is wonderful.
Yeah, it really did. Couple things with that. I, the Star Wars has that whole old Republic, which I
Mm,
felt like that could have been a great thing for them to go back and explore that in a trilogy, but they didn't. They decided to hang on to the Skywalker saga because they're like, oh, well, let's just pull in all the old Star Wars fans, right? Because Skywalker, and that'll make it all better. And unfortunately, the stories just weren't that good. I mean, if you look at and I know we're talking about Star Wars here versus Star Trek, but that's okay because this is kind of getting to what we're going to discuss. But like the Force Awakens, everybody's talked about it before, and I agree. I mean, the Force Awakens was basically just a rewritten version of A New Hope. It was the
yeah.
same exact story retold in the future. Like, oh, this is just going to happen all over again. There's going to be a droid that carries these plans and this, that, and the other. And it's like, okay, we've been there, done that, and have the T-shirt. With Star Trek. and this is where I'm going to connect the dots here with Star Trek, right? Uh, Someone like Gene Roddenberry or anybody in Hollywood, when you make a TV series and it gets canceled, you don't typically get a second shot, right? And my understanding from what I've seen and read, Star Trek Phase 2, which didn't happen, right? Because Star Wars came out and then they made the movies and did the motion picture and so forth. There were a number of episodic ideas or stories that were going to be for Star Trek Phase 2 that ended up being turned into and adapted to become TNG episodes, which I thought was very fascinating. Like, hey, that's great. If you have some good stories from this next iteration of Star Trek that you were going to use, but now you're not because you didn't produce it, why not kind of redo some of the working of the characters and make them into, stories for your new series that did get a go, in this case TNG. And um I think we mentioned this when we did kind of our TNG overview, but a lot of the Star Trek fans, especially those who were only dead set on TOS, were not happy about the TNG series. They thought that Star
Hmm.
Trek was Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Uhura, and that cast and that crew, and that was it. And there's been so many stories told over the years at conventions from the TNG cast about the way things were early on in the series until it kind of really got going. But I'm looking forward to this. I know, Chris, we have not intentionally ignored TNG as far as these deep dives go. It's just kind of the way things have unraveled with our schedule. By the way,
Hmm.
this is our season 7 premiere episode. So welcome to season 7 of our podcast, my friend.
That's beautiful. Yeah, we're on just like TNG, right? 7 seasons of TNG.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, yeah, excellent. So Encounter at Farpoint, we go right into it. Aired on September 28th, 1987, I believe, and it is, it's a longer episode, right?
Yeah.
About
Almost
an
two
hour and a
hours.
half. Yeah, almost 2 hours. So it's like a
Yeah.
feature movie, which was great. And you go like right like into there. There's no teaser at the beginning. What stood out to me at the beginning was there's like this beautiful, like this is the first time you see the Enterprise, the D, which is the fifth, I think, iteration of the Starship, like Enterprise, the fifth model down the line. And so you see this beautiful, like, it pans down or it pans up like that to see
Yeah.
the Enterprise. So I thought it was great. And you open up with this pan into the captain and the captain's log, and he gives the captain's log just like they did in TOS, which was great. And he kind of explains like the purpose of their mission, and they're gonna go out and go to Deneb 4 to see about hey, there's this proposal for a starbase to have the Federation like use the starbase. So they're gonna go check it out and snoop around. I think the captain even
Yeah.
uses that word and gets him this opportunity to get like used to this new starship, which was cool. And you get to see him like walk around a little bit of the starship too, which was great.
Yeah.
So beautiful design on the starship.
Yeah. I remember seeing in a documentary one time that Gene Roddenberry was very adamant that things had to look and feel vastly different, right, than TOS. It couldn't just be some kind of regurgitation of the original series, which is a great idea, because had they just tried to basically do everything to look kind of like it, and it was just kind of like an extension of TOS, it probably would have fallen flat on its face and failed. So he wanted the Enterprise, in this case, you talk about that pan down, that beautiful entrance
Mhm.
by the Enterprise D, which I think was amazing. Really, really wonderful. To me, that was super smart on Gene's part, and was very specific to the people who worked in the art department and the props and the models and everything, that the Enterprise D needed to be vastly different. This was a completely different generation, completely different crew, and it needed to separate itself, like you'd mentioned. And I thought that was very important.
Yeah, a crew with family, very, very much a larger ship, and in high definition. Like when I watched it, it's just beautiful, right? I mean, if
Yeah.
you if we watched it in um when it was originally airing, or the reruns when it was originally airing, like watching it now is just a different experience because it is so beautiful in high definition that I love it.
It's kind of like if you back in the 80s, or when reruns were going on and so forth, or even before Blu-ray and HD, right? And maybe even DVD. and you watch the show and then watch it in HD, it's like you were watching the show through like the front windshield on your car, and it's like really dirty and grimy from driving around the road and everything. And then all of a sudden you get a car wash and clean it off, and now you're watching it. Like to me, that's the
Mhm.
difference. It's this crystal clear, just this absolutely beautiful image. The Enterprise D is so iconic. And you could argue, I think there's an argument to be made both ways, but you could argue which Star Trek ship is the most iconic in the franchise. Is the original series Enterprise or the refit from the movies the most iconic, or is the Enterprise D? I would honestly, I I think nowadays I would kind of argue the Enterprise D might be more iconic. For the majority of the Trek fandom, but I'm open to it being either way.
You do bring a good point, like on the Enterprise D being so iconic. That's like so much of why maybe they brought it back in Picard,
Yeah.
right? So right then it came back, and everyone's just thrilled that the Enterprise D was back because um I know we're not talking about generations on this episode, but when we talk about generations, we'll have a chance to talk about like, hey man, we don't feel like the Enterprise D, like it shouldn't have gone down the way it went down, like that
No.
no,
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 we
not that
will, and
one.
we're gonna have a
Yeah.
Star Trek Generations discussion where we specifically talk about that movie. We won't go through the movie scene by scene like we do so many other things, but I do know that there's a lot of things we want to discuss, and I know one of the things we probably will discuss a lot about is the way in which they took out the D and Kirk, in the same movie. Like you took down two
Yeah.
icons of Star Trek, and not necessarily in the way that everybody had hoped for, or they even wanted, let alone the way in which they did it. To me, yeah, we'll talk about it
Well,
another time because we could get on a massive tangent on that one that could last several hours.
yeah, it could. It will. And we both feel similarly. But
I think so.
but
Yeah.
anyways,
Yeah.
yeah, coming back to Encounter at Farpoint. When Captain, like when he enters the bridge, you just get this nice, beautiful opening shot of the bridge. And at this point, um, it's only Tasha Yar, Lieutenant Yar, and Worf is on the ship, and then Counselor Troy, because Riker and Dr. Crusher, they're still on Deneb 4, and we haven't like met them yet. And Data's on there. So
Yeah.
that's who we have on the bridge, and you get some cute exchange between Data and Picard when they start talking about the word Snoop, and you get a little bit of Data's like personality too. So I love that they start bringing in Data's personality from the beginning, right? That he's
Yeah.
just kind of very, very much a like an innocent kind of character from there. So that's neat.
Yeah.
And right away, we get to Q very, very soon, right? And I love that they do that right away. There's an energy field that comes up. They get stuck. Troy like gets very concerned because she's sensing a very, very powerful mind. And you see those that her very pained expression on her face. And so and then bam, and then we've got Q. And as I was watching like Q come in and John Delancey playing Q, uh, I mean I've watched Encounter at Farpoint like many many times, but this time I was thinking uh, I was just so impressed with John Delancey and the consistency of like how he has played Q throughout the franchise, totally throughout the franchise. I just
Yep.
thought he did a marvelous job. I mean, obviously, because they kept bringing Q back, into Star Trek. Um, and I loved it. I loved how they brought Q back and that whole idea. It was great.
I'm curious, Chris. Now that we've had, no, obviously TNG's been over for a long time, right? And we've had the
Yeah.
movies and so forth. But one of the questions I wanted to ask you, not long after I was rewatching Encounter at Farpoint earlier today, and I thought about this, I wanted to ask you, now that you've seen all of Picard season 3, and in particular that period of time in season 2 up until the season 2 finale, right, with the wonderful exchange between Picard and Q kind of tells him how he feels and everything, does all of that change, excuse me, the way in which you look at Q or the way in which you look at this episode?
it doesn't change it. I think it if the way okay, knowing what we know in Picard, and then coming back to watch this episode Encounter on Farpoint, it almost reinforces or affirms like how I feel. So, and if it's okay, we'll like move around through Encounter at
Yeah.
Farpoint this episode too. But like at the end, so at the end when they've got those two space creatures like going and Picard and Q's back on the bridge and Q's kind of observing. He's kind of teasing them a little bit, like, oh, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Or why do you always want to shoot your phasers? And like, what are you gonna do? Um, but when Picard starts to put together, like they start to put together puzzle pieces, and Picard's like, um, Data, what about this? Worf, what about that? Dr. Crusher, what about that? I saw some glimpses of just looking at Q in the background, and this is how I felt. Q like nods, and he has this look of pride, like he's proud of Picard. That's
Yeah.
how I felt like seeing it now. Like he was nodding and he's like, "Oh yeah, you put it together. That's what I wanted you to do. You put together the puzzle." And then he says something like typical Q, like, "Oh yeah, I knew I should have made the puzzle like more difficult for you." Um, but that's how I felt like he was I- this time when I watched it, I just felt like he was sincerely trying to like help out humanity a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe the word change was the wrong word I used when
Mhm.
I asked that question. Maybe it's more of like, did it change your perspective, or did it give you more appreciation or anything like that for the Q character and the relationship with Q and Picard and the rest of the Enterprise crew?
Yeah, I definitely have more appreciation for Q and what like a great character he is. Like, yeah, he's a trickster, he's an antagonist, but he's also, I think, wanting to help like humanity, trying to weave his way like in and out of getting there to help humanity and help like push like humanity like along. Um, yeah, it definitely gave me more appreciation for him as a character and just the awesomeness that John Delancey like brought to that character,
I
so
I kind of felt a couple of different ways with this episode in Q, because when I was watching this, and again, we talked about this briefly before we started recording, but I still remember the premise of the episode as a whole, but obviously, like many other episodes we've done deep dives on or movies and things like that, I've forgotten some of the minor details, right? And so this is the first time I've watched Encounter at Farpoint since the Picard series came out. And we're talking all the way
mm,
back to season one. So it's been
yeah.
I mean, this has been years and years and years and years since I've watched the Encounter at Farpoint episode. So it was great idea that you had to go back and watch this as kind of a way to kind of work into TNG now, finally, I guess. Um, and so my thoughts were twofold. One, it seemed at times like Q is trying to bait Picard and humanity into making a poor choice so that he can say, "Aha, got you. That's why you're guilty. You failed the test." And then he goes, "Oh, see, and he gets the built further puffs up his ego
Mhm.
more." And then there's the other side where it's like he's baiting them, but I think he's baiting them hoping that they don't make a bad choice so that he can be that, I don't know how to say proud parent, but some type of proud thing, and proud being or whatever you want to call it. So I almost kind of feel like it's a little bit of a yin and a yang here with Q.
Mhm.
Like it's almost like he's baiting them, but yet he's rooting for them to kind of
Mhm.
do right so he can continue to assist. And by then assisting, he can go, well, see what you see, you couldn't do it without me. And this whole like, this sort of, I hate to use a term because it's overused, but it's kind of like this God complex, right? That Q tends to have at times.
Mhm. Yeah, he does have well, he's a godlike character, right?
Yeah.
So he does have that god complex, and um he's he- he's totally trying to give misdirection to the crew like all time. But I completely agree that he is totally hoping that they make the right choice, that they figure it out, that they're able to come back to it um and solve the circumstance in the end.
Yeah.
Um yeah, yeah. Boy, he was great, I felt.
But you're right. Like they
Yeah.
bring Q in right away, and we'll have a discussion about this at some other point, maybe with a special guest. where we talk about what we think is the top 5 or top 10 Star Trek villains of all time. And I think we'd be remiss if Q wasn't somewhere on that list
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah.
Depending
Yeah.
on how you look at him, right? Like, do you look at Q as a villain, or do you look at him as this kind of, maybe a little bit of annoying pest or gnat, or, I guess depends on how you look at it.
Yeah. It'll be a good discussion. I don't look at Q as a villain at all like now. So it'll be great like when we get into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was funny, like at the very beginning, you get one of the con officers, his name was Torres. Like his few minutes, he gets frozen by Q. It's okay. You hear that he actually he comes out safe at the end, but he's like the shortest con officer like there on the ship at the beginning, then bam, then he's frozen. It was
And
quick.
and for those of you who've seen this particular episode, Counter Farpoint, you know what color shirt he was wearing or
That's
uniform he's
right.
wearing.
That's right.
They quickly jumped into that whole let's go after a red shirt in TNG. And this is the pilot episode, and
Mm.
within what, 5 minutes of the episode, 10 minutes of the
Yeah.
episode, you've got a red shirt that's already been, well, he doesn't die, but I mean, he's already being affected by something. It's like, wow, let's talk about carrying over that
Mm.
tradition in TOS with the random red shirts that die or get
I
get
know.
inflicted in some way, right?
Totally. That was great that they did that. Yeah. So the Enterprise, they end up like trying to retreat and run away from the energy field and the energy ball and the that energy sphere, like that's what I named it. The energy sphere is like chasing the ship like really fast and overtaking the Enterprise. And then they get the great idea to do the saucer separation. And you see when that happens, right? Everyone goes, "Oh, is the captain really going to order us to do a saucer separation?" And indeed, like, yeah, that he is. Um,
And at warp, nonetheless,
at warp
which
9.
is not advised. I mean, I think that data says it's extremely, extremely high risk.
Right.
And so Picard right away, I mean, it's interesting because it's so amazing how fast paced this episode is, right? I
Hmm.
mean, just as far as how quickly things escalate in this episode from the very beginning of Picard staring out the window and you have the captain's log, as you mentioned, to now Q showing up and then they're racing away and Picard's very quickly having to make extremely high risk decisions as the new captain. I mean, it's in the very beginning of the episode where he's walking into engineering, taking that little elevator up and saying about how he's looking forward to getting to know his new crew on this new ship called the Enterprise and everything else. And all of a sudden, bam, bunch of high risk decisions.
That's right. And you, uh, a- and it's interesting. These high risk decisions you can tell are taking like a maybe a toll, or they're definitely affecting him, right?
Yes.
Because later on, when he actually meets like Riker and Riker comes on board, or Crusher comes on board, it's not like he's welcoming them in, like on board. He's totally in his mind. He's in his zone. Like I remember Riker comes on the battle bridge, and this is the first time Riker's come on the ship, and Picard's just sitting in the chair, like he's focused, like, and he's thinking. Riker's kind of looking around like, oh, like what should I do? Like the captain's not even talking to me. And the captain's like, all right, we'll just bring Riker up to speed on what's been going on, Lieutenant. And so that was most of the interaction. So yeah,
Did you, did you
go ahead.
feel, did you feel like the interaction between Picard and Rick, I don't remember it being that awkward, but it felt very, very awkward. Like he's your first officer and you don't even turn around and look at him right away. And then you kind of give him this like side eye over the corner of your shoulder. And Riker's just very dumbfounded. I think he's probably thinking to himself, did I make a grave mistake coming to this assignment? Like it just, I don't know how it felt to you, but obviously we know the history of their relationship and how close they are and everything that happens. So you're getting a hindsight to this episode, but it just felt way more awkward than I ever remember it. Did it feel that way to you?
Oh yeah, it felt awesomely awkward. Awesomely awkward. Not only with it felt awkward with Riker, felt awkward with Crusher and Wesley. What felt awkward, awkward with like a little bit, maybe not as much, but a little bit with Deanna, um, and a little bit like with Worf. I love that they have that whole like interaction where Riker comes in the conference room, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Picard's waiting, and Picard was like, "Oh yeah, okay, Riker." He goes, "So like when you were first officer on the Hood and Captain DeSoto, and heard like you something like you didn't
You
let Captain DeSoto off the ship, something like
you
that,
wouldn't let
right?
him beam down, yeah, on the away
Yeah,
team.
yeah,
Yeah.
you wouldn't let him beam down, and Picard's like, so the captain's rank didn't mean anything to you? And then like Riker's like taken aback, and he's like,
Yeah.
well, like permission to keep speak candidly, sir. And then they have this whole like interaction, and I felt like Picard was kind of really awkward, and Picard was kind of testing Riker, right? So obviously Picard had chosen Riker to be like his first officer, but he was testing him and testing him and testing him to kind of understand like what was in his mind, like what made his decision, what went into his decision making. So I thought that was fantastically awkward there.
It was, but I thought that Riker's response to Picard was really incredible.
Hmm.
When he says something like he says, does your rank not matter? The captain rank not matter? And he says, on the contrary, sir, it matters a great deal. So he is reinforcing back to Picard that he's not this insubordinate first officer who doesn't follow orders and that it doesn't matter that he's the captain, blah blah. As it's the exact opposite. It's that, hey, you're the captain, you have such an important significant role. I'm trying to protect you from your or trying to protect the captain from himself. I thought that was an absolutely beautifully written line.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was great. And there were so many like interactions, not only with Picard and Riker, but some of the other characters that kind of that set the tone on because on how like Picard was separated from everyone else. Because Picard, like as a captain, right, he always felt like separated from the crew. So
Yes.
you always you had these interesting interactions with like um Lieutenant Yar Tasha. She like she gets very like she emotes a lot and is very passionate. She's like, "Well, we should fight, sir. We need to
Yeah.
fight." And the Picard like calmly looks over at her, is like, so you think we should fight this like this this thing that's like more and more much more powerful than us?" And he's like, "Can you give me another suggestion?" And she's like, "Oh, sorry, sir. I spoke before I thought." Um,
But you know what?
and
I always thought Tasha was a great security officer
yeah,
because she always, I felt like, was leaning forward, right? Like ready to take charge, ready to step up, ready to throw herself in harm's way, ready to do that security job. I always thought she was a great character. And I just wish that things hadn't happened the way they did to where she ended up where things happened. She left the show.
yeah,
Um,
agree.
Obviously, by her leaving, that gave Worf a more prominent role, right? And so we got more of Worf, which is amazing. But I just always wished that Tasha had been around a lot longer because I thought she would have really added a unique dynamic to the crew that was missing when she was gone.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely changed the trajectory, right? It would have been interesting to see like how her character would have like developed. I could definitely see her, Tasha's character, uh, being in a red shirt, being in a command role,
Yeah,
eventually, right? She's
yeah.
very charismatic in that way.
Has she not been
Um,
killed by that stupid oil monster?
oh, that was
Skin of Evil. That episode was terrible
evil.
simply because they killed her.
You just felt like numb after that episode, Skin of Evil.
Yeah,
You just felt like numb, like what did I just watch? What just
yeah.
happened? That was
That
weird. Yeah.
that's probably an episode episode we should probably discuss at some point down the road
We should.
as a
Yeah.
deep dive just because I think there's a lot of controversy to that episode as far as the way in which they killed Tasha, the fact that they killed her, so many different things, so many different opinions over the decades from fans on the way in which that episode happened and the writing of it and the storyline and everything. So certainly an episode we should probably dive into some point down the road.
Oh, for sure. That would be good. That would be very
Yeah.
good to do. Yeah. So real quickly, some of the other kind of moments where the captain had like these awkward interactions with his crew. There was one with Worf where Q kind of shows up like on the bridge of the Enterprise, and Worf like stands up really quickly, like aim the phaser at Q, and then Captain Picard goes, "So what are you gonna do, Lieutenant? You're gonna like blast a hole in the view screen?" Um, or when he says to Worf, Worf says, "No, sir, like I'm a Klingon. I don't want to be in charge of the saucer section." And Picard's like, "You're a Starfleet officer."
Yeah.
So, yeah,
But that
that,
was good though. I like
yeah,
that little interaction. Like it was a little awkward, you're right, but to me it helped reinforce the fact that yes, he's a Starfleet officer, but he is a Klingon, right? This is a big deal. Like this episode, Klingons look completely different now than they did in
Yeah,
TOS, right? I
yeah.
mean, yes, you had the movies, which they transformed there as well, but the Klingons have changed, and he's reinforcing the fact that he is a Klingon, right? I mean, there this distinction that he's not just some other Starfleet officer, that he is indeed a Klingon, and so I think that's also an important interaction there. Um, I wanted to ask you too, Chris,
Hmm.
and I apologize. I know we're interrupting here a little bit on the awkward
No,
exchanges.
all good.
If you look at the five legacy captains, do you feel like, or do you think Picard was the most distant from his crew as far as the way in which he carried himself, the way in which he kept kind of an arm's length from his crew than the other legacy Trek captains? Or do you think there was somebody who did more of that than him? For me personally, and I'll answer this. Well, I'll let you go first, and then I'll tell you my answer. But what do you
Hmm.
think on that?
My initial reaction, just going through them, is yes, Picard was the most distant. When I think about Kirk, Cisco, like Janeway, they're all yeah, each of them are more like involved, with the crew, whether it be Kirk with uh Bones and Spock, or Yeoman Rand,
Yeah.
or or Janeway with Seven and Chakotay. Um, I really feel like Picard was distance was distant, and did so on purpose.
Yeah.
He's the type that would go back and think about things and go to his ready room and read a book and read Shakespeare, try to figure out a problem. So
Yeah.
I think that's part of his personality.
Yeah.
You.
And I don't think that means that Picard didn't have some sort of relationships with his main crew. I mean, he went and stepped up and fought on behalf of Worf as his Chadish, I believe is how you
Hmm.
remember how you say
Yeah.
it. He fought hard for Data in Measure of a Man and his sentientness, and I mean, of course, Riker was his number one, and so I do think there was that aspect to his crew, but I also agree with you. I think that he tended to keep himself distanced from his crew more than the other legacy captains. I would say Janeway was probably a close second, because I
Hmm.
think you're right. She had that stuff with Seven and with Chakotay, but in general, I think she also did that. There were many instances, many episodes where she would do that. And I don't mean to get off
Yeah.
on a tangent. I was just thinking as you're talking about some of these interactions with the crew and the way in which he was very, very distant from his crew in this pilot episode of TNG does to a certain extent carry on throughout the rest of the series.
No, that was great. That was great. And that brings up like this really relevant and related like interaction between he and Dr. Crusher, kind of either near the end of the episode or close to the end of the episode, when he walks into sick bay. He's talking to Dr. Crusher and he says, "Hey, sorry about the interaction with Wesley when he came up to the bridge." And I guess yeah, he was right. And just not used to kids. And then he says to Dr. Crusher, like, um, yeah, if you want to, I will like consider and approve if you want to transfer. Right. So dang, I'm like, that's the first time you have like an interaction with your captain.
Right.
Um,
Like any kind of a real
yeah,
interaction. Yeah.
yeah. Captain comes in and says, "Yeah, if you want to transfer, it's okay. I'll approve it." They're- And Crusher does a great job, right, of like responding to him and saying, "Well,
Yeah.
I requested this post. Is here's where I wanted to be." So that whole thing was, watching it again, I was like, "Yeah, that's awkward. That was good. It was great though. It was purposely awkward."
Yeah, I felt like this whole episode, and again, because I don't remember some of these little details, it's been so long since I've seen
Mm.
this, and I'm glad we're talking about Encounter at Farpoint. Um, there's so many times where I'm like, man, as an audience member, this is making me feel uncomfortable just with the way he's so cold. And I think you're right. What Crusher says, I think she says something to the effect of, am I not qualified enough to be
Yeah.
your chief medical officer or something, right? Like she kind of comes back a little snarky, but um, obviously her and Picard have a bit of a tie going back to Jack Crusher's death and him uh, being a part of the process with his bringing his body or something along those lines. That's what she described to Wesley. So there's just many interactions that Picard has with his crew members, as you mentioned, that are just super awkward. And I wonder, Chris, if that is, like you said, because of all the things going on in his head, all these decisions he's having to make that maybe he didn't think he'd have to right away. This unexpected being that has such great power and can just stop them in their tracks and is literally threatening death on them because they're being tried for the crimes against humanity and so forth,
Hmm.
and being held accountable for that. Or is it something to do with the fact that this is a pilot episode, right? And the relationships aren't established yet, and there's so much of this that is so brand new that it's just things haven't been worked out with writing and the actors and how they're working together. I kind of tend to think it's maybe a little of both.
Yeah, I do think it's a combination, them working it all out. And it does feel like, of course it feels a little bit stiff because it is the
Yeah,
premiere episode, right? And so
yeah.
he's for Picard, it's almost like taking it to the extreme of him being distant with the crew, and that's how it is. So it totally is. Yeah, it works out.
I'd be curious to compare this pilot, and we will at some point, right?
Yeah.
After we're done looking at the first five. I'd be curious to compare this pilot with the other pilots and how they felt. Like, did they feel stiff? Did they feel awkward and so forth? I know when we've talked about Enterprise, I think when we talked about the series as a whole, I remember specifically, which is wild that I can actually remember this, but I can remember specifically us having a conversation about the pilot for Enterprise, Broken Bow. And I can remember very vividly, I believe you agree with me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris. I remember saying that I thought Broken Bow might be the best pilot of all the Star Trek series. And I'll have to see if that holds true once we've gone back and gone through each
Mhm.
of the pilots again and watched them in detail. But I'd be curious to see how that holds up across the other episodes, if how they compare with the way this one came out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that one like as well as we do like our pilot review. Broken Bow, I remember was very, very it opened up with tremendous action. Like
Yeah,
in that one, I think there was a foot chase with involving Klingons,
yeah.
or a Klingon that was great to do
Yeah, it
there.
was so
Yeah.
good. Oh, that episode was so
Yeah.
good. But I know that's not what we're talking about. I'm just
No,
thinking
it's
about
all good.
across the pilots, right? And then how
Yeah.
this kind of rigid stiffness and the way things kind of shook out in this first episode, how that would compare across the other Legacy Trek series.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And so in Encounter and Farpoint, they did the saucer separation at warp. They got away, like the saucer went one direction, and then the star drive went the other direction. Star drive went towards Deneb 4, if I recall that correctly, to
Yeah,
pick up Riker and Dr. Crusher, and I believe
Wesley.
I wanted Wesley. That's
Yep,
right. Wesley was
yep.
on there too.
I
Yeah.
found it funny too when Riker walked onto the battle bridge.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, yep, the soft section's here, sir. It's in orbit. Like
Oh yeah.
that
Yes.
50 minutes went by really fast. And then he's like, yeah, right, Riker, you're gonna do you're gonna bring them back together, and you're gonna do it manually. And he's like, what? Like,
Yeah.
I almost felt like was Picard doing this to test him to see was
Yeah.
he really this like if he's the guy, and I don't remember it, you have to remind me, Chris, is there some point in TNG where it's mentioned that Picard hand selected
I think
Riker as
so.
his first
Yeah.
officer? Okay, because if he did, I'm
Yeah.
like, if you hand selected this guy, why do you need to test him? It really felt like he's like, yeah, go do this thing and do it manually. Almost, I don't know. It was just that part was really awkward as well. I felt.
Yeah, I felt if my memory is right, I thought that one of the major reasons Picard hand selected Riker was because of a disagreement that Riker had with the captain. And so Picard saw that and go, "Oh, these are the kind of qualities that might be helpful, like as a first officer." I have to go back and kind of check on that, but I think I feel just like you that Picard hand selected Riker. And so yeah, when they I thought it was hilarious. Yeah, when Picard said, "Yeah, like put it back together manually." Like, and everyone's like, "Why manually?" Right? Like,
Yeah,
why
right.
do it manually? Yeah,
But also, like when you watch it, Riker's just standing there by the battle bridge captain's chair. He's not doing anything manually. He's just ordering data to do it. Like, yeah, okay, go ahead. All right, full stop and
yeah,
let the momentum carry. Like he didn't do anything, I guess, unless by manually they meant he was going to do that. Vice just tell the computer, okay, go ahead and
ah,
reinitialize the saucer section and the other section.
yeah.
I It seems really strange to me the way that whole thing played out.
It was. Okay, I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here. But if you think about like how Picard was the first time he met Riker and what Picard was asking of Riker, okay, then fast forward to Captain Jellicoe and Riker, and then
Mm.
I think, well, Jellicoe wasn't that bad. You know?
Actually, you're not wrong. You're right, actually, because all Jellicoe was just asking Riker to do and the command crew to do was just do their jobs.
Yeah,
And they
you
were
know,
almost like they were so comfortable with Picard that they just felt real lax. And Jellicoe's like, just like he didn't say this specifically, but you could read it in his face, like, go do your freaking job. Just do your job.
yeah, yeah.
You're
And
right.
Jellicoe was
Jellicoe
like,
wasn't that
yeah,
bad.
yeah. Jellicoe was like, hey, would you rearrange these shifts? And that became like a huge deal, right? No, we can't
Yeah,
rearrange these
right?
shifts. Yeah, we can't
Yeah.
rearrange these shifts. Like, who? I mean, I work, you work. Like, we gotta we gotta
Yeah.
rearrange shifts all the time, man. So,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
true. That's a really good point. I never thought to make those comparisons. And you look back and you're like, yeah, Jellicoe really wasn't that bad, actually, as a matter of fact. And honestly, by the way in which he negotiated and the way in which he was firm and the way in which he stood his ground, right?
Mhm.
Uh, probably was a pretty darn good captain, to be honest with you. Like he was very firm. He expected a lot out of his senior leadership,
Yeah,
but his senior officers should have that level, right? I mean,
yeah.
yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
It's funny. Jellicoe, he's like, can Counselor Troy, can she wear something more conservative? And then all of a sudden, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So, like, we got to give Captain Jellicoe some props.
Yeah, I
Give him
think.
some.
Well,
He's not a
and I
bad.
mean,
Yeah,
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 and Ronnie Cox, what a terrific actor. I mean, we
yeah,
of course love him in Total Recall and a million other things. I think was he in RoboCop? Wasn't he in Robo?
yeah. I think he was in RoboCop. Yeah,
He was in RoboCop. Yeah, he's been in a lot of things, right? So, he was fantastic as Captain Jellicoe.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it was good. Yeah, it was good. So they got Riker, they got everyone on the ship now, I believe, and they're trying to figure out what's going on at Farpoint, and they've reconnected both the saucer section and the star drive, and soon after in this episode, you get a few more visits by Q, but then you are start to realize like something is amiss with this station, this Farpoint station that gives them
Yeah,
everything that they want. And they have soon after, like a big giant spacecraft comes in, um, and they don't know what's going on. You've got another away team that goes down to the surface to have more interaction with I'm gonna forget their name.
yeah, the
The
Bandy. Yeah,
Bandy's right,
Bandy.
right?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, figure out what's going there. And so they're doing some subterranean investigations, some investigations around the city to see what's going on. And this away team, I think Riker goes on several like away missions on this one.
Yeah, he's
Um,
all the time. He's like, I gotta get off the ship. Picard's driving
yeah.
me nuts.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, because he's on the surface of Deneb like 4, and he's on the surface when it's getting pounded, right?
Yeah.
It's getting pounded and he's all dirty. And I remember they come back up to the Enterprise, and then he's got to go on the next away mission like immediately after to the alien spacecraft to see what's going on
Yeah.
up there.
You
Um,
mentioned the stuff's going awry, right?
yeah,
Down on the station. The first instance we have of that is where I think it was his name Zorg or something like that.
or
Where Zorn,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, not Zorg. That's like Toy Story. But but yeah, the first thing goes awry is when Zorn is there and offers him the fruit, and he's like, "Oh, there's no apples," and all of a sudden the apples appear, and he's like, "Well, I promise you those weren't there before." And he's like, "Well, does it really matter if they were there before, as long as it makes you happy or something?"
Hmm.
That's the first time where even Riker's like, something ain't right here. This is strange." And
Yeah.
as an audience, we're like, "Huh, okay, obviously something is afoot."
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And like watching it first time, I like how they build that up, right? Like what
Yes.
is going on here? Is it
Yeah.
something with the bandy? Is uh and it's kind of creepy too, watching it the first time. Like it was mysterious and you're just not sure what's going on. You know, you and I have each watched Encounter of Farpoint like many times, so it's not creepy anymore, but I remember distinctly like feeling that way like when I watched it the first time, so it was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to forget that your man, Miles O'Brien, is in this. He's a con officer there. Or a
He is.
yeah.
Yeah.
So he's in there. It was cool.
But we don't even hear his name from what I can remember. He's not named at all in this first episode. I don't hear him say like O'Brien do this, O'Brien do that. He has speaking lines,
Yeah.
but they don't actually mention character name. But yes, this is the if I could relate it to comic books, this is the first appearance of Miles Edward O'Brien. Although he is not a engineer right now, he's wearing a red shirt.
He's
So
wearing a red shirt.
he, like us, survives the red shirt. And if those of you listening, Chris is also wearing a red shirt.
I
So
am wearing
I
our red shirt. So our podcast shirt.
yeah, and so hopefully Chris will survive to the end of the episode. Um,
Yes.
He won't get frozen by Q or anything. But yes, this is the first appearance of Miles Edward O'Brien, the greatest character in the Star Trek franchise. Maybe not the greatest. He's my favorite though,
He's
as
your favorite.
all of you know, watching or listening. But yeah, it was great to see him. I could not remember which episode was his first appearance, whether it was this one or it was one of the first couple of episodes in TNG. I knew it was early, but going back and seeing this again, it was great to see him, albeit not being a named character yet.
Yeah. I liked seeing him. This was on the battle bridge, I think,
Yep.
and
Yep.
Tasha, the captain, and the counselor, they had been like transported down to this area with Q and that courtroom scene with Q and with Q and that now like that iconic judge's garb, that red flowing garb that he wears that you see with Q. So they
Yeah.
had the captain, Tasha, and the counselor had this whole exchange with Q, and then they're transported back to the battle bridge after that exchange. And I love watching O'Brien's expression because Captain, Tasha, and Deanna, they all look confused, and O'Brien's kind of like, what's wrong with you guys? Why do y'all like look confused? I've been here this whole time. Like
Yeah.
everything's normal. So I like that. That was comical to me watching it this time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so they are I I mean eventually at the end of the episode, right, we realize that the Zorn, not the Zorn. The bandy.
Bandy.
Getting all my aliens like confused here. Yeah, but
It
yeah.
happens. I've done that many a times, Chris. It's okay.
But yeah, the bandy have captured an injured life form, the giant space squid, and had been forcing it to be Farpoint Station eventually. And so the Enterprise frees that space squid and it reunites the the space squid pair so that they're now happy.
I remember the space squid, but I've forgotten that one of the space aliens was the station. I had
Mm.
forgotten that part, but until I started watching and all the stuff started happening, the weird things started happening, I'm like, I'm thinking if memory serves me, that this station might not be what it appears to be. And then as it went along, I was like, oh, I wonder if the station is something that's been, trapped or caught. And then
Mhm.
towards the end, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense now. But I had forgotten that, like I said, several of the little details of the episode. But I remember at the end that scene with the creatures up in space.
Yeah. You know what I caught this time around while watching Encounter at Farpoint was the thematic connection between the holodeck and the space squid creatures, because they spend a
Hmm.
lot of time in the holodeck, right? With when Riker goes and he finds data on the holodeck, and they have the whole Pinocchio thing. And there's the explanation of what the holodeck is,
Yeah.
rearranging like matter. Um, and then when they realize what the space station is and what these space beings are, they say, well, yeah, that makes sense. Of course, there's going to be a being that can rearrange, that has evolved to be able to rearrange matter into different things. And so to me, when I saw this, I was like, okay, this is the first time they introduced the holodeck ever. Then are kind of
Yes.
connecting it
In
later
all of
to
Star
the
Trek.
in
Yeah.
all of Star Trek, right? They're connecting it to this power. Kind of, this creature has this power that's similar to the holodeck, but it actually creates, in reality, this the transformational, like, of energy. So I thought, oh, I think they made that intentional connection there, and that was pretty neat to see.
Yeah. I also remember when Riker first goes into the holodeck, right? When he's looking for
Yeah.
Data, and Data's up there trying to whistle or sing or whatever, right? And he's at that tree. And I remember this moment being referenced in Star Trek Nemesis after Data had died, right? And
Oh,
Riker goes, "Yeah, I can even remember the first time I met Data was in the holodeck." And he
yeah.
was trying to sing that tune or whistle or whatever it was that he says. So I found that really cool, right? That TNG and the producers and writers, Rick Berman, all these people like that, decided to bring the end of TNG, right? At least from what we knew, because we didn't know, obviously, Picard, the whole Picard series was going to come out many years later, how they connect it from Nemesis
Hmm.
all the way back to this Encounter at Farpoint episode and that moment on the holodeck. So to me, that moment on the holodeck where Riker meets Data for the first time became, at the time, before Nemesis, obviously, it would have been a funny, whimsical scene. But the way in which things happened and the fact we know through the Picard series that Data eventually dies, right? Picard is there to kind of release him and so forth. Um, this scene becomes very touching now. It takes on a much different form to me personally,
Yeah.
because we know what's going to come and what's going to happen, that and the way that it's referenced, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I asked you the whole Q question and the way in which you look at it now, knowing what you
Mhm.
know, because there are scenes like this in Encounter at Farpoint that have a different vibe, a different feeling based on how things are going to go in the future for this crew and these
Yeah.
characters.
Yeah. And, and I come back to thinking about John Delancey, how he played Q, how the show writers crafted and created Q. I think it was done in such a, like, a masterful way, because yes, he's the antagonist, right? But you still feel comfortable, like, with him coming back. You don't get this sense of, like, okay, he's evil,
Right.
right? Or out to destroy you. Um, you you get the sense of, like, he's continually trying to test you and to trick you. Like, he's
Yeah.
testing you and tricking you, and how are you going to get out of this puzzle that he keeps, like, giving you, like, all the time. Um, so, who knows if they, I mean, well, I think they must have thought about bringing him back when this premiere came out, because I believe Q is back in the first season, so it's not too
Yes.
long after that he
Yeah,
shows up.
because we
So
get Q Who, right, which is the first
yeah.
episode, the Borg premiere, and I couldn't remember. If I couldn't remember, I know the Borg made an appearance, obviously, in that Q Who episode, but I couldn't remember if they made appearance in Encounter at Farpoint.
Hmm.
As I was watching it, I'm like, okay, no, there's no Borg in this because of the way the story was going. That this just wouldn't make any sense. But yes, the Q does come back again. We get an episode early on, somewhat early on in the first season with Q Who, and I like the way that they kind of left it open with the way they wrote it, right? When he said, "Oh, you never know when I might show up again or
Yeah.
appear again," something like that, right? And for John Delancey, I think he's even mentioned in the past that he just assumed his role was a one and done kind of deal.
Hmm.
That because you never know if they're ever going to bring characters back. Natalia's even mentioned that before, like as a guest character, you're hoping they bring you back, but you just never know. But the way in which all of that happened, it was very obvious that Delancey made such a big impact as that character. They're like, okay,
Yeah.
well, we've got to bring this character back, and of course he did, and many times through TNG. He made an appearance in DS9, an appearance in Voyager. He and then of course obviously in Picard. So
Yeah, absolutely. That was great. They also make reference in this episode, see if you caught this too. I think at least a couple times on the Ferengi.
yes,
Yeah, so there's an interaction I think between Picard and Grappler Zorn, and they're talking about the space station, and the Grappler says, "Oh, well, maybe we should give it to the Ferengi, or the Ferengi might want it." And Picard's like, "Well, um, like a past Ferengi deal, like the Ferengi didn't like this deal," and he said something like the way it
yeah.
tasted to the Ferengi. So that was funny. It like implied that the Ferengi, like, I don't know, ate the other offerers, ate the
I thought the
bargainers.
same way. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, if you
yeah.
think about it, in TNG, right? The Ferengi in TNG are like these weird space pirates with whips. They weren't the same Ferengi that you meet in DS9 and moving forward, right? They
Yeah.
completely changed the Ferengi. And although in Enterprise the Ferengi are different, they're kind of like marauders and stuff like that. They go on board and steal stuff on people's ships and so forth. And I wonder if that was because they wanted to try to tie it back to the way TNG
Ah, yeah, okay.
kind of
Yeah.
does it, like in this episode they reference it. And so in this episode, Encounter at Farpoint, obviously Q's a brand new character. uh Data, this android type character, is somewhat of a newer idea. And you get the Ferengi, which is a brand new species that they mention. Obviously, the keeper of the station, and then the space squid, as you called them, they're all new, right? But the Ferengi become a mainstay, and this is again another first first cameo mention, if in
Yeah.
comic book terms, of a species that's going to become greatly important in Star Trek moving forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, awesome, awesome. Yeah, it was talking about the music that they used here in this premiere episode. They took the music, I think it was Alexander Courage's theme song, if that is on my mind, but correct me either in the comments, or if you remember, Zach, correct me, but I believe that was his theme song he developed
Maybe.
from Star Trek the Motion Picture. I'm reaching in the depths of my mind. I'm thinking it was pulled
I can't
and
reach that
brought
far,
in.
Chris. So
Yeah, and brought in there. We should go back and watch Star Trek the Motion Picture, because that's where I'm feeling it's coming from there. That
well, yeah, no, the music in the Star Trek movies is the same as in TNG, but if you notice, there are some subtle differences in the music for this pilot episode of TNG versus the movies, and
Mhm.
differences between this pilot episode and the rest of the series.
Yeah.
So obviously they had the music, they made some tweaks to it, changes to it, put in this episode, and then I think they decided to make some additional tweaks moving forward, which became the song, the opening intro that we all know so very, very well from this show.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna go back and check and confirm that for us. That'll be good.
Yeah, you should.
Um, yeah. But at least, talk about my favorite part, or favorite theme, favorite concept of this premiere, the pilot episode. It does have, for me, it does have to do with Q, um, and setting up this idea that, um, proving humanity's worth, right? So as you're going out, and as humanity's exploring the galaxy externally, um, how is humanity developing, like, internally, and are we becoming, like, worthy, like we want to expand, and then are we internally becoming worthy of expansion? And so I like that idea that is set up here, in this first episode, and I think that theme is explored all throughout TNG, so I love it. like humanity's like worth.
Do you feel like that theme in maybe sometimes different iterations of that
Mm.
theme, like in Battlestar, do you feel like that theme is somewhat common across science fiction as a whole? Because I feel like that theme or some iteration of that theme seems very prevalent across many different sci-fi franchises.
Oh man, that's such a great question. Yeah, absolutely. Like, yes, yes. When you think about, I mean, think about things like Frankenstein or Blade Runner. Yeah, absolutely. It's like seeing improving like worth.
Yeah, it's just this idea of humanity's role in everything, the way in which humanity is I don't like to use the word evolving, but the way in which humanity's evolving, changing,
Mm.
is humanity getting better or worse? I would argue in real life, I don't think we're necessarily that much more advanced. I'm not talking technologically speaking, but just in general, as the human race, that we're that much different than maybe we were even 1,000 years ago. We may think we are in certain, and it maybe in certain ways we are, but just generally speaking, I still think we deal and struggle with a lot of the same things that they did 1,000 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 500 years, whatever. Pick your period of time. I still think we
Yeah.
struggle with a lot of those same things, and that's why I think so many people are drawn to Star Trek. This idea that in the future humanity has overcome so many of these obstacles, right? So many of these things that maybe are holding us back, or whatever you want to call it. And so this idea of humanity's worth, humanity's I guess the term would be I can't even think of it now off the top of my head,
No.
but
Yeah.
like in Battlestar Galactica, right? Is
Yeah.
humanity worth saving?
Yeah. Is
Um
humanity worth saving?
that's a question that Admiral, at the time, Commander Adama asks. And so
Hmm.
I think Q's kind of getting at something similar here, isn't he? Right? Like,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
humanity really changed? Has humanity really evolved and gotten better as a species? And I think Captain Picard believes it, the crew believe it, but at least initially, I don't think Q believes that. He wants them. That's why he wants them to prove themselves in this case, in the encounter at Farpoint.
Yeah, and you remember when Q first appears and he appears in those different uniforms, they're
Yep.
each kind of they are different versions of either like um militaristic uniforms um or police kind of uniforms, just showing this kind of very domineering or conflict based like part of like humanity. So that that was cool. That was interesting.
Yeah.
So great points on that, Zach. I think when you compare, we still struggle with so many of the same struggles like we had like 1,000 years ago. But at least now, like there's this medium like with Star Trek, and just with the world, with people being able to communicate, where you can have people questioning, right,
Yeah.
and raising those questions and raising awareness, which is a huge like leap forward than where we were like 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, well, the foundation of a free society is free speech and the ability to ask
Hmm.
those tough questions and right and have those tough discussions. And that's what's so great about Star Trek is that it challenges and addresses those tough things, you know. I last weekend, I think it was, I was watching an episode of the original series with my son,
Yeah.
and we watched one of the episodes. We watched two episodes. One of the episodes we watched was "Let That Be Your Last Battlefield."
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
hadn't watched it in a while. I wanted to watch it again, and it's so good because it's just challenging and questioning something that was so prevalent back then, right? This idea that somebody was inferior because of their color of their skin,
Mhm.
and we still see some of that today. Although I would argue maybe not as much as it used to be, but I would still say that we still see that today, and that was something that was addressed right in your face in that episode of the original series. So I'd like to think as a human race that we've improved in some respects. And I think we have, but we still absolutely struggle with some of the same stuff that they did hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
in Encounter at Farpoint, we're looking at an episode where you brought this brand new character in Q, who's this kind of omnipotent, omniscient, kind of godlike character who is challenging humanity on, have you really changed? Have you really got bettered yourselves as a
Mhm.
species? Or are you guilty?
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know. I mean, is there a better representative in this case than Picard? I mean, maybe not. But him and his crew certainly do everything they can to prove Q that they are indeed
And that is a
improved.
great, yeah, that is a great premiere episode to open up thematically. And you brought up Battlestar Galactica, and I feel similarly on Battlestar Galactica, right?
Yeah.
Right. That one too. That was awesome. Um,
Yeah, the miniseries did a great
yeah,
job of that. I think just kind of like this episode does.
yeah, it does totally. Other like highlights that I did enjoy that actually when I saw this time around, I felt like, oh, it's kind of it's cool, but it's a little bit out of place when Dr. McCoy shows up.
Yeah.
Um, I thought, yeah, it was really cool that he was there, like totally. But I also felt like, yeah, uh, with the flow of the premiere, right? It was like, I guess it could be in, it could be out. I don't think it really mattered, but it was nice to have him in there, right? And to make that connection. I don't know how you felt about that watching it again this time.
Yeah, I remember him being in it. I
Mm-hmm.
remember images, and my question was, well, if he's an admiral, why isn't Picard there meeting him? Why isn't Data? Right? I mean
Yeah,
that's a captain's role, right? If an admiral
yeah,
comes on board the ship, it's usually the captain who's going to be the one greeting and talking and walking. I did feel going back now this time and rewatching it, I did feel like it felt kind of just forced in there. I don't think it added anything to the episode other than the fact that they have a TOS character in there. It's almost like the
yeah.
TOS characters in there in order to send this new crew off. And then you questions like, well, much I love McCoy, he's my favorite character from TOS. Why was it not Kirk? Would Kirk have upstaged Picard, and that's why? Was why not Spock? I mean, we know Spock enters the show in season 3 or 4, and that
Yeah.
episode unification, right? Um, yeah, it felt out of place, and I think if they had cut that from the episode,
Yeah.
it never would have. It would nothing would have changed.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so that means 1987 is when it was out. So they were probably
Yeah,
crafting it around like
86.
1986-ish.
Yeah,
So William Shatner was like, maybe they were involved in some of the movies at the time, but it was all with Paramount. So
yeah. But I'm curious though. Like I tend to believe that if they really wanted Kirk in there, they would have put him in there. But I do
yeah,
feel like by having Kirk in there, that would have upstaged it and taken, and it would have almost been like, oh well, we can't even do a new series without the last captain, and maybe it's too much of a tie back to
it's
TOS
true.
versus having
Yeah,
McCoy maybe isn't as much. I don't. That's just my thought.
yeah, true, true. Yeah. Any other things that highlight for you as something that are favorites for you throughout this episode?
I mean, just a couple little things, some humorous ones. We have the cosmic cheerleader outfit, right? Which even the dudes were wearing.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Troy also wore that, and that might be the most horrific uniform in all of Star Trek. I mean, they're just absolutely terrible. Tasha randomly wore that in a scene on the bridge. I'm like, oh, she was in a normal jumpsuit, and then all of a sudden she's in the cosmic cheerleader thing, and then it's like, but then she's not, and it's like, this is strange. So those were bizarre costume choices, especially with the men wearing them. Um, so that was kind of somewhat funny. You'd mentioned some of the other ones, which were stand out to me. One of the things that I found very interesting, this to me kind of sets the tone for Picard as a captain moving forward,
hmm
and that's when he asks Riker to help him with the whole shore leave thing because he's not a family man. He says, "I'm not a family man, Riker." And he asks for this help because he doesn't do well with children and everything else. And to me, that sets a foundation and a tone for what your leading captain now of your series is going to be portrayed as, right? You have a ship now with family, because even he mentions like, this is a starship with families, and I'm not a family man, Riker. I need your help. And I mean, Riker's not a family man either, but maybe he just feels because of his position and the lack of kids or anything that, not doing well with children, that that affects it. And this rears its head again later on. There's an episode uh where the power goes out and he's trapped with those kids,
Oh
and he's got
yeah.
to try to make
Yeah.
do. Although I think over the course of time he begins to really like them, and that changes him a little bit. But in general, we see that kind of come up a couple different times. So I thought that was a very pivotal moment, him asking his first officer for help with the family stuff, because it's just not doesn't really seem like it's in his nature. So that to me helps paint a picture of his character.
Yeah, it does. And this was after the very awkwardness between Picard and Riker, which is funny. And then you see Picard like turn around, and he's like, I need to ask you a favor. Like, and he's very, very serious. Like, I need to
Yeah.
ask you a favor. And Picard's like, yeah, or Riker's like, yeah, anything, sir. It's like, you gotta keep the kids away from me. Right. So it's like that's what the favor is. Like, I'm not good with kids. Keep them away from me. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That now it really was. So those were a couple of the moments. We obviously got a lot of firsts. A lot of obviously all the new characters are firsts.
Mm.
Um New species, new aliens, Q, things like that. Chief O'Brien, first appearance. Dr. McCoy, seeing him again, first appearance of the holodeck. Those, if we're again related to like this were a comic book, there'd be a lot of first appearances. This
Yeah.
number one issue comic book would be massive in Star Trek as far as the first appearances go. Um, I did want to ask you, because I was thinking about this as I watched this, the judge outfit Q wears.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's too many other outfits in all of Star Trek that are maybe more iconic than Q's outfit. I mean, obviously you had the Monster Maroons, the TOS
Yeah.
Starfleet uniforms, uh, but I can't think of too many more. That judge's outfit Q wears is so iconic from this episode, and then also in All Good Things that we've talked about
Yeah.
before, right? Where he comes back and he's back to judging humanity again, coming full circle from this episode in Encounter at Farpoint.
It was so like out there, so like flamboyant, outlandish. I felt like when we um that was like, what is this? Like, what is this
Yeah.
huge garment that he's wearing? It's almost, I don't feel this way now, but the first time I saw it, I felt like, oh, it almost looked too where I wasn't taking it seriously, or like too
Mm-hmm.
clownish. Um, but it his I mean, it was obviously, it has stayed the course of time. People cosplay with that
Yes.
Q garment, and they used it, they brought it back in All Good Things. So I think retrospectively, now looking at it, they did a good job. They made it outlandish and flamboyant, like on purpose. um and yeah, I mean, who else is going to wear that but Q? It's like something
Right.
like no one else would be wearing this thing but
Yeah.
Q.
That's why I just think like there isn't a ton of Star Trek costumes, in my opinion,
Hmm.
that are that much more iconic than that one, just because of the role and the gold standard that TNG has become, the role it plays in this pilot episode, the role it plays in All Good Things. It's just in the way you start out this episode or this series, with one of the scenes being Q wearing that, and in a few scenes in All Good Things, you're ending the series with that. To me,
Yeah.
that whole it paints that picture. It's just when you see that outfit, you instantly think of Q, right? You
Yeah.
instantly think of
Yeah.
him. There's not a whole lot of outfits across characters. And I'm not talking about like Borg drones and stuff, but just there's not a lot of outfits where you see the outfit and you instantly think of a specific character. The Monster Maroons is many characters, Starfleet characters, and that Judge outfit by Q is very iconic. So seeing that
Yeah.
again in this rewatch of Encounter at Farpoint, I think is pretty special.
Yeah, they did a good
And
job when they set up.
memorable. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, agree 100%. Yeah, that's cool.
So those are just a
Yeah.
couple things. I mean, anything else that stands out to you? Just a couple of things that we hadn't already mentioned that I had written down that were, to me, you know, important or impactful. I agree with you on the intro of the Enterprise D at the beginning, with the way they angled the camera and they had the ship kind of coming down from above, and then the camera zooms in over the ship. That was just, I had forgotten that sequence, and it
Yeah.
was I watched. I'm just like, oh my gosh, that ship is gorgeous. I just love it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Not so much like important, but just things that I noticed was, I totally agree with you. I'm glad they did not bring back the cheerleader kind of outfits. back into the later episodes, that I'm so glad they didn't. That would not
Yeah,
have been a good look
they were terrible.
at all. Yeah, they were bad. And just the design of the bridge, just having that contrast between the TOS bridges and the movies.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just this beautiful, like elegant, like bridge. I just loved that.
And it's so big too.
Yeah,
Such a huge bridge to give you the scale that you're on a different enterprise, and it's much bigger than the first enterprise or the first two enterprises. I guess if you can count the original series and then the refit.
yeah, totally. Um, and the ending of it, where Picard says, "Hey, let's see what's out there." I
Mm,
think was just beautiful for him to
yeah.
say.
I'm glad you mentioned that because
Yeah.
I think that was written so wonderfully, right? Like
Hmm.
let's see what's out there, and then of course we get the iconic engage, right?
Yes.
Um, yeah, it was that to me was ended. I just, you know, we'll get into this more as far when we rank all of the pilots, but I really, really loved the way in which they start TNG and they end TNG. I mean, the series, not the movies,
Yeah.
obviously, but just the way in which it was thrust in. And I know it wasn't a popular thing when it first came out back in '87 because you had all the people from TOS going, "What is this? We have a captain with male pattern baldness and a new ship and this new crew, and there's no Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And it's not our crew. We don't like this. This is we can't do this." But obviously, as a whole, we know what we know now. TNG is the gold standard. It's iconic, and the groundwork that it laid moving forward to the rest of the series and all the '90s Trek that we got and Enterprise. I just love the way in which they set the stage with that Q character and everything they do there, and then the way they wrap it up with Q. It was just a brilliant way to start and end a series.
It is beautiful. Yeah, I really feel like Q is just always there trying to help Picard, like in some way, in his mischievous way. And you're right, that being able to start with Q and end with Q was great. And then the transformation of Picard in Encounter from Farpoint to All Good Things, where because there's, if you remember the scene in All Good Things, Picard walks in when they're playing the card game, and
Hmm.
when he walks in, everyone becomes stiff, and Riker, and just like that first interaction that they had in Encounter in Farpoint, like Riker becomes uncomfortable and stiff, and he goes, "Is everything okay, sir?" Right? And he's like, "Yeah, it's okay. I want to be able to play the game with you guys." And
Yeah,
so,
I should have done this a long time ago, right? Or whatever the line is.
yeah,
It's just so
yeah,
perfect.
yeah, it is perfect. So thinking about that kind of full circle between Encounter and Farpoint, because we talked a lot about how these awkward interactions between Picard and these important like members of the crew, right? So
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
I was Beverly, I'd like be teasing him all the time. Like, hey, you remember like when you first welcomed me on the Enterprise and you said if I wanted to transfer it would be okay?
Yeah.
I'd be like I'd be giving him a hard time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say one thing I noticed too was I think one of the main character who had the smallest role in this was probably Geordi.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
he's had such a minimal role, right? For a guy who becomes your chief engineer, but very minimal role, right? He reports to that interaction with him and Riker at Farpoint, that weird, like, is this a formal report? And he snaps to attention. It's like very militaristic. This is what like Gene Roddenberry, World War II pilot, that militaristic kind of influence into Starfleet that he had, that became a little bit more subtle after he passed and Rick Berman took over was very evident in this. And that whole weird, awkward interaction between Riker and Geordi was super, super bizarre, like just very bizarre. But he had I think, the smallest role of the main characters that from what I can remember.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, I agree. Oh, some other things that came to my mind. These are just like minor like details that come up when we watch it again, right? But all those minor interactions, but they're not minor, but those interactions between Troy and Riker, They're always giving
Oh
each
yeah.
other kind of the side eye, right? Like the Imzadi and um when Troy believes like Riker's gonna be in danger, she's like, no, 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 like don't send me up back to the ship. You know, you're gonna get hurt. So there's that. Um, there there was also, this is really minor, but it stood out to me when I saw it. There's also this part where so Riker's on the ship and he's looking for Commander Data, and he asks this officer, like she's just around, and he's like, hey, can you tell me where Commander Data is? And she goes, yeah, oh, yeah, I can tell you, and the ship can tell you too. Let me show you how to work this, like Commander Riker. And she shows him how to work it, and he's like, oh, okay, thank you. And then he walks away, and then I see her, like this officer, she like looks back, she's looking back as like Commander Riker walks away, and kind of setting up to be like, maybe she's attracted to him, like setting him up to be like a ladies' man. So I thought
Yeah.
that was kind of funny, like a minor thing that stood out to me.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and when she's like, "You must not be familiar with the Galaxy class ship or whatever," and he's
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, I guess not."
She went out of her way to help him.
She
She
did.
was, yeah,
Yeah. Well, she was
yeah,
an ensign. He's a commander. He's like, "Hey, how do I get here or whatever?" Which I guess kind of makes sense, right? He's new to the ship and probably hasn't been on a Galaxy class. In fact, I think the Enterprise. I don't know if the Enterprise was the first Galaxy class commissioned or not, but
yeah.
yeah, very very interesting takes there. Yeah. Yeah. Just
And yeah, I think and it was smart. I know Vulcans were kind of in the background,
yeah.
but for me, it was smart not to have. I don't think there was many Vulcans speaking. I don't think
I
we
don't think
had
there
any
was any in
Vulcans
this
speaking.
episode. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Just in the background, I think you saw some.
Yeah. But not
I thought
anything
that was good.
speaking. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a good play.
Yeah. Data is basically the equivalent of the Vulcan. He is the Spock of the Enterprise D, right? I
Hmm.
mean, as far as this idea of lack of emotion, logic, smart, intelligent, all these things. And even there's even a line McCoy says something to the effect of like, "Oh, I'm surprised, you might as well have pointed ears or whatever." He's like, you're just as bad or something like that, like this he's carrying on his disdain for the Vulcans and all the banter that him and Spock used to have. So I thought that was a nice little touch. But yeah, man, this was a fantastic look back on TNG. I'm glad we did Encounter at Farpoint because this kind of sets the stage, as you mentioned. We were texting earlier, for future TNG deep dives, right? And I
Yeah.
know we've got many episodes on the list for years to come that we could do of TNG deep dives that are we haven't tackled yet. And again, it wasn't because we were intentionally ignoring TNG. It's just kind of the way the schedule fell. But it's great to jump into TNG, and I look obviously like anything else. I very much look forward to many more dives into the TNG world.
Too. We're gonna have a great time with this.
We
Yeah,
really are.
yeah. Awesome, my friend. This has
Yeah.
been great.
It really has. Thank you so much. And as always, everybody, thank you so much for watching and listening all over the globe in the interwebs. Be sure to go on Facebook and Instagram. Check us out there. And YouTube, if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, you can find the video version of this and others on our YouTube channel. So be sure to go there and subscribe. Also, if you're not tracking, we are also on Threads. So you can go find us and follow us on there. It's a I don't even really still fully understand the point of it. It's like some kind of extension of Instagram. It just almost looks like it's like another social media platform, but we're on there.
Mm.
We have 100 and some followers on there now. So be sure to go on to Threads, follow us there. We will post updates on there as much as we remember to. So, because yeah, got to do their stuff too. But yeah, be sure to go on there and check us out. And if you're listening to us or watching us in Antarctica, please be sure to let us know because you will make Chris's year if you let us
Totally.
know. Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be.
absolutely.
I know it's your, but we might have to figure out a way to charter a flight down there and bring some random
Mhm.
Redshirt podcast T-shirts and hand them out to the Penguins or whoever we see. I don't
Mhm.
know if we can afford that, but maybe some others listening will sponsor us to go down to Antarctica, and we'll get listeners down there too.
Good. Yeah, all of you working in Antarctica, I know you are doing important scientific work. Thank you. Continue. Keep doing it.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Please do take care of the Penguins for us. But anyways, all right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. As always, we appreciate it. Take care, and we'll catch you next time right here on the Random Redshirt podcast.